Nice, Claire. Very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike.
I mean, it does feel a bit like that, doesn't it? We've been sort of assailed on every level, at every point, and everywhere we go, there's bad news.
Well, I think that you've got a double whammy, haven't you? Because you've both got the economic realities, which are, cruelly biting on most people. And that's, a lack of jobs. Because, for example, the national insurance contributions have gone up and it means that employers can't afford to employ people.
Yeah.
And all of the things you've discussed, I mean, I have to say that the Tesco yellow sticker area is very popular in every shop because it's true that prices have gone up and people are queuing up to get the reduced prices because they just can't afford the cost of living.
Do you know what I've noticed recently, and it's only because I go past it every day, Bermondsey Tube Station, which is, southeast London, it's a relatively busy part of the world. In the last few weeks, there's a table, which gets longer every day, of food, free food being given away to people, and so many people are going there to get free food. I've never seen anything like it.
Yeah, and I think that's because they're desperate. So I think that's a genuine problem, but I also think, and this is probably where I'm more... more about it. I think the other thing that people are feeling is the cultural assaults.
Yeah.
And when I say cultural, I don't mean, art spending. I mean, the fact that you feel that the way of life in this country is constantly demeaned and under attack.
Yeah.
The gaslighting, like yesterday when they said there is no two-tier policing.
Right.
And the whole nation went, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
The fact that, and I mean, even when you talk about the trade unions, Mike, I mean, I'm less concerned about the return of the 70s. I don't think that's quite what's happening. But if you actually look at the origins of the bin strike in Birmingham, actually, if I was working on the bins, I might be outraged as well. Frontline workers had a massive wage cut. Birmingham Council is under the cosh economically. They're the ones that were to blame.
Yes.
Because they implemented this equal rights law, this ludicrous thing that's not done women any favours at all. It's done in the name of women's rights, but actually has just been an interpretation of the law in such a way that the council now can't run services and workers are suffering.
And that's a hangover, of course, from Tony Blair's time, isn't it? Because he was the one that sort of put that all into play, and it all went to the European Union, and this directive was issued that they'd have to try and, define what job a woman did and whether it was commensurate with what a man did, and the whole thing's bonkers. But I mean, that's hit every single council, and I agree with you that the council are definitely as much to blame, if not more to blame, than the actual people who are on strike. But 130 of the bin workers have actually agreed a deal. There's only 40 odd left from Unite who are apparently not willing to sign the deal, and I just think the government's now to blame for not making them do a deal.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of Birmingham, the situation is so dire, and this sort of rats running around situation just epitomises the notion of this kind of rotten UK. And people feel it, that things are so out of control and so vile that you're living in a country that feels underdeveloped.
Yeah.
But all I'm saying is, in that instance, I wouldn't blame the workers, as it were. And just to go on the cultural point, if you actually look at the employment rights bill that we're about to discuss in the Lords, there's a huge range of things in that bill that are very scary, that do worry me. Like, for example, giving the trade unions more time off to negotiate equality settlements. So immediately you've got EDI officers for unions being created in a bill. I think that they use the notion of the old-fashioned we defend the workers to actually attack workplaces. And you've already been discussing it, but it's very important. This workplace banter bouncers is a disaster.
It is.
So they say to defend ordinary workers who work in pubs or universities or football grounds or wherever, anywhere the public are, the workers need to be defended against the public, and not the public going over and hitting them or, harassing them in a serious way, but verbal harassment. So you can be sitting in the pub, basically quoting this show, Mike. You can imagine ranting, everyone go down, did you hear Mike this morning? Having a chat, right? And the people who are serving you, somebody says, oh my God, they're talking about the migrant crisis. They're moaning about the potholes and Starmer again. I find that offensive. They can then threaten to sue the pub, the owners, for harassment by the customers. which obviously means that owners of pubs who are already under the cosh, despite Starmer going on the front of the Sun and saying that he supports the pubs, he doesn't. Everything he's done is attacking hospitality.
Right.
But those workers can now use, means that the pub owner or the university owner will say, we don't want the type of people in who are going to say something offensive. We don't want the talk radio listener in because they just the type who'd upset our staff, etc., etc. And consequently, they're trying to sanitize the public square of the wrong kind of people. So I think it's those cultural attacks that are really upsetting people and getting on their nerves. And
no, absolutely, no, I totally agree with you. But all I'm saying is that there is a sort of, even if you're sort of happy to park that and say, okay, well, let's hope we can do something about that. You then turn around and over here, there's something else to worry about, or there's something else that's bothering you, like for example, the price of everything going up, or you know, you're getting a water rates bill coming through the door that's suddenly gone up 57%. I mean, it's inconceivable that this is what's happening, and just life in general is difficult. And when I say going back to the 70s, I remember the 70s quite fondly. You know, I was a teenager. I wasn't, you know, I didn't have a particularly bad life. I had a weekend job, you know, but I just remember we didn't have very much, so I didn't really miss anything. But at the end of the day, we were quite happy. I get the sense now that people are quite angry walking around. You know, there's a sense certainly in the cities of this country that people are under the cosh. They're stressed out. You know, everything's tough, everything's hard. You know, and they're struggling.
Well, the reason why I was emphasising the cultural thing is not that it's like superficial, but because I agree with you that people in this country are righteously furious and angry, right? They feel as though they're not being taken seriously and their concerns are not being listened to, which is why it's particularly galling, as I say, that when you raise things like two-tier policing, there's, you know, the political class just ignore it, say it's not happening. So you're meant to feel as though you're going mad. Or they try and label you as, I don't know, an extremist of some sort or far right and so on. And so the frustration that people feel, I do think, you know, when you're talking about the trade unions, one of the most disgusting stories of the week is that the National Education Union, rather than concerning themselves about the fact that there's a danger of indoctrination in schools by government interference, that is something to be rightly worried about. The imposition of, say, adolescence, that drama series on every child for political purposes. What do? They pass a motion saying that the union, the education union, represented teachers, is going to stamp on anything to do with reform. They're called Reform Party, far right and racist, right? Absolutely disgusting. It's got nothing to do with them, right? But the main reason I'm drawing attention to it is if, as many millions of people are going to do, you're going to vote reform, your kids are going to go into a school where the teachers are more interested in telling you that your parents are racist far-right members than they are in educating your kids. And I think that it's not just the economic situation and everybody feeling everything's going wrong. It's feeling as though you can't even discuss it. Dissent is being demonized, if not criminalized. You can't have a conversation to moan about it anywhere without worrying that somebody's going to snitch on you and the cops are going to turn up and issue a non-crime hate incident against you. But that's why I think people are particularly angry.
Yes, but schools have been like this for a while, and I speak as a parent because I know from what my kids went through, and they're now old enough to be out of the system, but, you know, they were constantly being told about climate change, they were constantly being told about gender and why genders could be recognised in 72 different ways, you know, and it was relentless, and it wasn't just, you know, here's a lesson to teach you about, you know, sexual education, and here's, you know, it wasn't this is up for debate. It wasn't a kind of, you know, let's talk about this, is quite an interesting idea. It was, no, this is the law, and if you don't agree with it, there's something wrong with you, and if you don't think that climate change is a massive issue, then obviously your parents must be some kind of far-right nutters, or maybe your dad works for talk radio. I mean, you know, it was as simple as that. That was what they were being told.
Yeah, and I just think that this is one step even further, because it's an attempt at distorting the democratic process.
Yeah.
Now, whether you like it or not, Reform had 5 MPs elected, and all right, it might be 4 now, but there's about to be council elections. Democratically, people will be asked to vote, and a trade union is basically trying to set up almost like a cordon sanitaire around Reform, one of the parties that's doing very well in the polls, and say, you shouldn't have anything to do with them. They're too dangerous to engage with. And that is basically trying to turn kids against their parents, because there will be many parents who'll vote for them. But you also raised the issues of gender. So if I could just do an elegant segue into what's really upsetting me today, which is, or the nervousness, which is in, half an hour at 10 o'clock, the Supreme Court is going to tell us the definition of what a woman is. And it's terrible that we've got to this, but in this judgment at 10 o'clock is the most important legal fight going on for women's rights. And we're in a situation where 4 Women Scotland, a very brave activist group that started off really small and tiny grassroots and have now grown and known internationally, took the Scottish government to court, but this will have implications for the whole of the UK, where they basically are arguing over whether having a piece of paper that you bought for £6, a gender recognition certificate, means that you can count as a woman. And of course you can't buy being a woman. You can't biologically have any inference whatsoever by having a piece of paper or a certificate. But we are dependent on the Supreme Court deciding whether this is valid or not. And this is a hugely significant moment, because it's nerve-wracking, because if it goes against 4 Women Scotland, then we're in a bit of a quandary. But what I think that we can say is it will have raised all the right issues, which is that the political class, and that includes the Tories and Labour both together, have got into a situation where they've rolled back women's rights by decades and decades and decades, by making even the definition of what a woman is a subject of controversy, and you can be called a bigot for asserting the biological reality of sex. It's a ludicrous situation, but that again sums up the state of politics. And I think the fact that that if you have this conversation in the pub after the Supreme Court and they brought in the Employment Rights Bill, you could be out on your ear, and the pub owners could be sued for harassment if there happened to be somebody who's trans ally who works in the bar. That just is why I think we have to pay a lot of attention to the attacks on free speech that happen at the same time as they're sticking the boot in economically to us.
Yeah, it's absolutely unbelievable. We'll bring you that decision, by the way, when it comes through the Supreme Court. Great to talk to you, Baroness Claire Fox. Brilliant as ever. Thank you very much indeed.